Alright, so what do you think these three pictures have in common? Anybody? Vincent?
They're outside.
Basically. Alright, well, let's see here. Well, the answer is that these pictures represent three most dangerous jobs in America. Alright, so today I will be talking about how each of these three jobs, airplane pilot, fisherman, and a logger, are the most dangerous. That one, right? Oh yeah, let's go to the slide. So fatality, if you don't know what that means, it means death rate. So for the fisherman, 129 people died, workers died out of 100,000 workers. A logger, 116 people died per 100,000. Airplane pilot, 72 per 100,000 people. As you can see, a fisherman is the top dangerous job. Alright, so okay, so back in 2008, for about a year, I interned at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a federal agency that looks at labor market activity, working conditions, and the change of price in the economy. I also studied this topic for a couple of weeks just to refresh my memory on it. Alright, so I'm sure most of you or all of you have had a job before, or are looking to get one. For those who've had a job, I am sure that you probably thought your job was very hard or gruesome, and wish you had chosen a better job. Well, after this speech on the three most dangerous jobs in America, I'm sure you're going to appreciate your job a lot more better. Okay. Today, I will cover the job of an airplane pilot, a job of a logger, and then a job of a fisherman, and just to show you how these are the dangerous jobs in America. Just to refresh your memory, if you forgot, airplane man, or pilot, fisherman, and logger. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to know about is the job of an airplane pilot. This is the pilot right here, and this is the co-pilot, and this is the cockpit of an airplane. Okay, so being an airplane pilot has its benefits, but it's very dangerous because of the jet lag, the mental stress, and the flight takeoff and landing. Takeoff is when the airplane takes off into the air. Landing is when it lands on the landing strip. But the benefits are that pilots make around $100,000 per year, and some only require a high school diploma or a flight certificate. But the ones that require a high school diploma are the smaller aircraft airplanes. So this one here is actually a bigger one. So they probably have like a bachelor's degree or at least 2 years of college. Alright, so airplane pilots experience jet lag with fatigue because of all the hours they spend flying, especially when they go through different time zones. According to the BLS, which is the place I interned at, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they spend an average of 75 hours a month and work an additional 140 hours a month performing non-flying duties, which include waiting for delays, which is when airplanes have to circle in the sky, and they have to wait to come down on a landing strip, because if they don't do that, then they end up crashing with another airplane. So they fly up there, and then waiting for delays to clear and the aircraft to arrive. Being an airplane pilot hardly involves any physical activity. As you can see, they're just sitting there discussing stuff with each other, just looking out the windows. Let's see here. But most of the job causes mental stress. So back to when I said they only work 75 hours a week, it's really like that's barely anything, but it's just really taxing on the brain. Let's see here. And then being an airplane pilot, you have to make sure the flight goes smoothly, even in bad weather. Sometimes they can't even see when they're flying at all. They're just like flying in like these big old clouds, and they can't like know where they're going. So you have to really rely on each other, the co-pilot and the pilot. They need to always be ready to react if something goes wrong. And the most challenging part of the flight are both the takeoff and the landing. This requires a lot of teamwork between the pilot and the co-pilot. An example is from the BLS again, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it says, as the plane accelerates for takeoff, the pilot concentrates on the runway while the co-pilot scans the instrument panel. And this is the instrument panel right here. So as this guy scans for the runway, which is where they land, this guy Yes, looks at their valve. Okay. Let's see here. To calculate the speed they must attain to become airborne, pilots consider the altitude of the airport, outside temperature and the weight of the plane, and speed and the direction of the wind. Movement of the plane reaches takeoff speed. The co-pilot informs the pilot when to pull back on the controls to raise the nose of the plane. Control right here raises the nose of the plane, so you just pull back on it and their plane rises. Obviously, you can tell this requires a lot of teamwork between both of these people up here. If it wasn't for these people teamworking, this airplane would crash, most likely. Now that you know a little bit more about an airplane pilot, let's look at a logger's occupation. This guy's on a log, just trying to move him around. All right, being a logger is very dangerous because of the demanding physical work, hazard work conditions, and skill required, not to mention low wages. These guys make around like 20 or 30 grand a year, compared to an airplane pilot, which is $100,000 or $100,000 a year. These are vast amounts of hard work activities like climbing, lifting very heavy logs like these right here. If you probably won't lift that one, but he'll probably like lift one of those, Let's see here. If the loggers get injured, they are probably not close enough to get to any hospitals to get treatment in time. That's why this job is considered dangerous, because it's not really close to a hospital. So if they get hurt, they just pretty much just lay there or try and get to the hospital in time. These loggers face tree branches that are constantly falling down to the ground. There are windy conditions from time to time, along with muddy ground, which makes walking difficult. There's vines that are not visible, because there's like when they're walking, there's a bunch of little vines that are just like chilling on the ground. And sometimes when they walk, they trip over the vine and they end up just like fracturing their head on different things, and they end up dying. And it causes hazards to the machinery too, which operate on the pieces of wood. Snakes and humidity, along with severe cold weather, are constant threats. There's always like really high humidity and cold weather all year round, and you have to learn to deal with it with wearing warmer clothes or whatever. Loggers must develop great skills in order to cut trees properly so that it doesn't crush them. And there's a story from thedailybeast.com, and it says in 2003, 24-year-old Jesse Rucker left for his third day at work as a logger in Glendale, Oregon. He was an Army veteran and an avid outdoorsman, but he was just learning how to drive wedges into trees and make them fall in a particular direction. When a 100-foot pine tree began to fall, and the base of the tree separated from the top and crushed Rucker, killing him instantly. As you can see, this guy wasn't really meant for this job. Well, he was, but he just kind of started out early in his career and didn't get the right training, and he ended up dying from one of these humongous trees landing on him. Now I know the dangers of being a logger. Let's move on to the next one, which is a fisherman. And that's two guys on a fishing boat right there. All right. Being a fisherman is very dangerous because of the strenuous work conditions, work equipment, and mental stress. This is the boat right here, the end of the boat, and that's the net that they use to catch the fish. All right. The whole netting and processing of fish is very taxing on the body. Fishermen are outside all day, and the hours are extremely long. Members of the crew need to stand on the lookout at different times throughout the day and night for weather changes and other ocean hazards. So this ocean looks pretty clear right now, but there's an island in the distance, so probably look out for that one in a couple hours. According to the BLS again, the crew must be on guard against the danger of injury from malfunctioning fishing gear, entanglement in fishing nets, and slippery decks, ice formation in the winter, and being swept away by a large wave. These ship crews are voyages that may last as long as a couple of months. These fishermen are in close proximity with one another and work in tight, cramped spaces. Along with that, they are away from their families, which can take a toll on their emotional well-being. Okay. So, in conclusion, today I talked about three of the most dangerous jobs in America, which are the airplane pilot, logger, and a fisherman. As you can see, these three jobs are very risky, and I suggest that you appreciate your job a lot more from now on, and hopefully avoid these jobs in the future.
Guys, take that minute from you. Man here.
All right, Giovanna, what did you think?
I think he did a good job, but he was reading a lot from his paper. He could have looked up to the crowd more often, and he was kind of flipping back and forth with the slides in the beginning. But overall, I think he delivered his message well.
All right. I think that this is one of those things where the technical stuff would probably be a good thing to work on ahead of time. There's nothing that was required by your presentation to have your particular laptop applied here. This, we've got very simple slides and pictures. That's something that you could store someplace online and you could access it, and we wouldn't have all that setup time that would be problematic or complicated, or you could bring it on a flash drive and use the PowerPoint presentation on the computer here. Simplify your life a little bit. Otherwise, it gets kind of complicated. Same thing with the podium that you've got. I didn't check, but our podium over here is supposed to adjust, so you might have easily been able to avoid having to use that one by adjusting the height on the podium that's in the room. We could check on that later on. But it seems like you brought in a lot of stuff that from the very beginning you're involved in doing something other than talking to the audience, and I think that you kind of stay in that mode a lot of the time. You don't really engage the audience. You're talking in front of the audience. You are talking about a subject that's interesting, but you don't really seem to be connecting with the audience, and part of it is because of all of that superfluous issue that I was just mentioning. Now, I like which is kind of strange because I thought your attention device was pretty solid. You ask a good question about the picture. You kind of force Vincent to participate in your attention device, which I thought is perfectly fine. And the topic becomes clear as a consequence, so I thought that worked really well. And the thesis is basic. I'm still kind of vague on why we're doing these particular things. They're interesting. And I think that there could be something you could be saying about the fact that these are the 3 most dangerous jobs. But as it is, it just seems to be like you were listing them. And I think that seems a little awkward. So maybe a little bit something more to hold that theme together. All the mechanical stuff on the introduction was basically good. The material, you usually have source citations there that you're providing us, and I thought that was fine. Organizationally, it was fine. The signposts, you're really dependent on the slides to get us from one point to the next. I think you want to do a little bit more verbalization of those issues. Sometimes I think you get off on tangents. You start talking about things in the picture that aren't really about what you're discussing. You're talking about the pilots and the control that they have, and then the instruments that are going on there, and they look out the window, and I'm going, okay, this has got very little to do with the dangerous part of the job. When you talk about the role of the pilot and the co-pilot and how they have to coordinate what they're doing and integrate those kinds of things, I could see where there's some stress issues going on there. One of the things that you want to point out, and I think that most of us kind of figured out as we're listening to this, is that it's not on-the-job deaths that occur with the pilots, right away. It's that they have a higher mortality rate because of the stress that they have, but it's not like, they go to their job and die on the job, because if they die on their job, there are probably a whole bunch of other people who are dying on the job too, and we'd be in even worse shape as a consequence. The same sort of thing, like you talk about the loggers, and you start telling us about the picture, and the truth is that there isn't a lot in the picture except there's a signpost and we know what you're talking about, but there's nothing in the picture that you explain that talks about the danger that's going on there. I like the story that you had about the one guy, and I think that might have been better to start off that section of material with, and then present the other information along the way about the other potential dangers that they face. I could have used a little bit more source citation about the snakes and, you know, tripping over things. It just sounded like you were kind of rationalizing or explaining why it might be dangerous instead of telling us what researchers have found. And the delivery issue, I think, is problematic.